We'll get into troubleshooting here. The system has an offensive odor. This is not real common with NuWaters, but if your system has an offensive odor, I'm going to first check if any harmful chemicals have entered the system. Something killed off your bacteria. That's the kind of thing that would give you something smelling in the exhaust. Check for aerator operation. Let's say if your blower's not blowing right now, it's simply working as a septic tank. You're going to get that methane kind of smell, that anaerobic treatment smell. And with our vented lids, which I should have discussed that also, our vented lid over our digester, if you don't have air moving and you're digesting and doing its job, that would give you an exhaust smell. Yeah. So we want to check against free-flowing air between these two compartments. If for some reason someone would leave the mastic off of this, you can see there's mastic between this compartment and that compartment. These are airtight, and that's part of the reason that we have a direct pass-through right here versus a regular baffle. These systems are vented separately. This is our digester. Digester and clarifier are vented back at the digester access. Our trash chamber is not vented here. It's vented back through the septic, through the plumbing in the house. So you get water coming in and displacing through here. If there's any venting to have, for this trash chamber is vented back through there. This venting is all, and these actually are common. So there's any venting of these compartments all comes out through the vented lid over our digester. We also have a vented lid at our blower housing, and you can see on this picture here, this shows a kind of a typical NuWater tank. We've got our trash chamber access. This is our digester. This is the blower housing and the clarifier. This contractor has used these little 8-inch vented lids, 8-inch vents over the top of his polylock lids, and that's a good way of going. Keeps the water out of the lids that way. So that process of troubleshooting, now you want to make sure if it smells, make sure that the venting is done properly. Check to see if the system's been pumped recently. If someone pumps the system, for the first few days it's going to have a potential for smell because it doesn't have that bacteria colony set up. Now typically if somebody comes in here and pumps this tank out, I have heard of guys calling and saying, my low air alarm went off, and I'll go through that shortly. But typically that's because they pumped out both compartments. If this trash chamber needs pumped, you don't need to pump the whole treatment tank. You can just pump just the trash chamber, and by nature, naturally it'll draw this compartment down to the level of your inlet into your digester. But if this trash chamber, which is developing too much solids, you can pump that out without pumping this out. But if the tank has been pumped recently, then that could create a situation where it's smelling without digesting. Yeah.
When do you guys recommend to pump the trash chamber? The same as like a normal septic trash chamber?
It's different. So this trash chamber is a trash chamber and not a septic tank. Okay. So a septic tank typically is pumped when you have less than a certain amount of daily flow in your clear zone. So a septic tank pumper will have like a checklist or a formula for when the tank needs pumped. They have a scum layer on top, sludge layer on the bottom. In between is their clear zone. And naturally a septic tank should have at least 1.5 days of residence time in a clear zone. So these pumpers have their criteria for pumping. And it may be, on a typical septic tank, you might say 8 inches of scum, 16 inches of sludge, check mark, time to pump that tank because you got too much scum and sludge, right? Otherwise, the more scum and sludge you have, the less clear zone. Well, with the NuWater, we don't care about that as much. This is a pre-treatment tank. The only thing we care about is the fact that we don't want to plug our outlet baffle. So if you're getting your sludge level is building, once it gets past 24 inches, that means it's less than 12 inches to our outlet. Now it's time to pump that guy. So that's our only criteria.
Doesn't matter with the scum.
The scum layer, it's because of our regeneration, our scum layer doesn't develop much. I've heard of small scum layers, but I've never heard of a large scum layer on our system.
Okay.
Now, on a system like this here, on this picture, we have this system has the dose trash combo tank. This is sound placement makes this tank like this. But this is a 2-compartment 1,500 gallon tank that's set right next to this NuWater tank. And the waste comes from the house into the 500 gallon compartment, which is, there's a partition wall about here on this tank. It comes into the 500 gallon compartment. You can see this outlet comes out of here. It's not showing real clearly because of the soil, but then it comes into the treatment tank. So there's just an outlet baffle, no filter or anything. But this is roughly a 550 gallon trash tank ahead of our tank that's built on here. This here also has a similar criteria. Only pump it if the sludge is risking you from plugging baffles. So that gives you a little bit more depth available. So if you have on this one, if the trash tank assembled, if you get like more than about 2.5 feet of sludge in there, then it's time to pump that 550 gallon tank. Having this tank ahead of there actually gives you more pre-treatment and more robust system. We've started designing using trash tanks ahead of when we have larger systems with families, larger homes, higher flows. The systems do appear to work slightly better with a 500 gallon trash tank ahead of it when you have the high flows.
Or pumping it more frequently, correct?
Yeah, or if you, so by installing that, it reduces the likelihood of needing pumped regularly on the trash tank. The pumping hasn't been as big of an issue as with the trash tank ahead of it. What that does is it reduces our solids level in our system a little bit to where we're less likely to push solids in a like a bath day or a laundry day. The large families tend to have those.
Yeah.
The big flows, the surges, and they'll push. If you got solids mixing in here, and those surges might push. If you have a bath day, you could easily push 200 gallons through this clarifier in a 2-hour, 3-hour period. Well, if the clarifier is only 160 gallons, that might take, you're taking some of this waste through there. And what the problem that came up was when they're sampling for fecal coliform, that's the bacteria. We need about an 8-hour die-off time to get the bacteria to die off. So we found that with families, large families, we were having too much solids in here, would create that, it would force the solids out with the bacteria, so the bacteria would have some solids to eat as they're going out and they'd stay alive. So if we put a trash tank ahead of it, it pulls the solids levels down, keeps the bacteria colony healthy. There's still enough solids in there to stay alive, but the fecal coliform die-off takes place better than.
So if you didn't have the room for the extra tank, could you increase your recirculation line to reduce the fecal matter?
No, that would be kind of a modification of the system. We're not allowed to modify the system, but the system as it's done here, as with the original design, it works really well. The big families are where the sludge, the trash tank ahead of it helps. I would say like if you're doing a spec house or you don't know what the flows are going to be like, the trash tank's not a bad investment. It's not much more money.
You're right there.
You're already there installing a tank. It's kind of like, it makes sense. If you got a site where you don't have room for it, if you can check with the homeowners and, hey, there's only going to be 3 people living in the house, only going to be 4 people living in the house, no big deal. Those aren't the households that have the huge laundry surges, the huge bath surges, and the system will work great. You may have certain households where if they use a lot of chemicals and materials, things that are going to kill off the bacteria, you could build your solids faster than they like, because then you're going to be having to require pumping
Is
maybe every couple of years.
there certain limitations for the NuWater? Say like if I had like a 6-bedroom house, would it have to have that trash tank up front?
If you had a 6-bedroom house, normally, we have the BNR 500 and BNR 600. That goes up to a 5-bedroom size. If you do a 6-bedroom, now you're dealing with having to put 2 500 gallon per day NuWater side by side.
Oh, okay.
And 2 4-bedroom systems.
Oh, okay.
So you'd put like a 1,000 gallon trash tank ahead of it, go through a D box and split it into 2 NuWaters, and then come back together into their pump chamber.
Yeah, I see. Makes sense.
So that's kind of that. We're kind of going through the
They can just
troubleshooting
keep
here.
exponentially going up. Like if you want to do a configured community system like that.
Yeah, we've done. When you get to many systems, we like to actually make that be a dosing into it, like on a church or something like that. We've done these high flow systems where we have a surge tank, and we put a pump. Sometimes we'll put a pump with the duplex pumps, or but we'll run to a flow splitter that'll pressurize and give us equal
one.
flow to each system. So they'll each get 5-gallon doses every
Like a high
15
school or
minutes or
something,
whatever.
high
Yeah, you get a high flow. That works really well to do a surge tank ahead of the treatment units.
Yeah, which gives it more time in the NuWater.
Yeah,
as
so
well.
it slowly doses to it. So
So that's what I
getting
look
a
at.
steady flow.
If you had, like you said, 200 gallons in one day, or in a couple-hour period, you're gonna flood that system and push everything through.
Yeah.
So a lot of it that maybe hasn't had the time to sit in the digester and actually get all of what it's needing is just gonna pass through.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So we'll get in through these troubleshooting items here. If the system appears dead, we want to check that the owners aren't using excessive amounts of antibacterial. So system that appears dead, usually everything's kind of gray, black. It's just like it stinks, it's gray, it doesn't have any of that nice brown chocolate milk color to it. Excessive amounts of antibacterial soaps, heavy medicine concentrations. If people are on chemotherapy, they'll kill off the bacteria. Bleaches, fabric softeners, etc. Discuss the owner's water usage schedule and use of these items. If the aerator's not running, you want to check for circuit breakers for failure. Make sure it's not a breaker flip somewhere. You can plug into a receptacle or extension cord known to be working. That eliminates the power. Check for proper wiring connections. Inside the blower, where this power line comes into the blower, there's a chance that the disconnection, that there's some little connections that could be checked there if you do determine you have power to that. Check small overload shear pin. So inside the blower housing, if you take these 4 screws off and you pull that guy up, this housing comes off. There's a wool surround around that blower motor. And on the top of it, there's a little reset button. All the newer blowers have that. The old ones had a reset pin that would shear if the blower ever froze up, if it got dropped real hard or something like that. Instead of breaking, it would actually that would shear that point off. And actually, the intention for that is for if something gets in the diaphragm, it's sitting there pumping and pumping, something blocks it up, some piece of junk or something gets in there. That instead of burning up the motor, it'll shear that shear pin and cut the power. And so those are all the old blowers. The recent newer blowers, instead of that, it'll pop a shear pin, a shear switch that will just allow you can just reset that switch if that blower is not operating. And keep these troubleshooting tips handy. If you guys have a 3-ring binder in your truck or something, it's not a bad idea to have this, or keep a PDF of it on your phone if you're ever doing the maintenance or troubleshooting. Let's see. If the system's not aerating, so the motor's blowing, but it's not getting that mixing, agitating, digesting action. You want to check inside the blower housing. Underneath here, if you take this screw out here, there's a little filter element inside there. You can check, make sure it's not plugged with water or snow melt mud or something like that. Unplugged with silt or snow melt mud. Something would be very uncommon on the west side to get a dust storm enough to plug this, but what I have seen is this get caked with mud from snow melt if muddy water gets into the blower housing. Let's see. Visually check the air line and diffusers for broken connections or restrictions. If the diffuser has buildup on it, clean or replace diffusers. So these diffusers can, under certain chemistry conditions, develop a slime around them. So if it's blowing for some reason, starting to lose pressure, I don't know if it's 1 out of 50 or 1 out of 100 systems out there that these people, there's just something about their chemistry and their waste that's creating this slime growing. It's slowing down, inhibiting the blower. It's not allowing it to blow as freely. You'll notice it over a period of years if that's going to happen. But if that's the case, you can actually cut the transport or the pipe coming down to it. And if that happens on a site, usually recommend installing a union on it for future cases, just a threaded union for one of those few sites that does have the issues. Then you can pull these the diffusers out, and these guys, if it's got that dripping growth on there, this can be soaked in a bleach solution for 2 days, and that'll shrink these little it'll kill off the bacteria growth, and shrink the growth and allow it to blow freely then. Now, what some O&M providers, maintenance providers, will do is they'll carry a few spare diffusers with them in the truck. If anybody ever has a need, they'll just switch them out, and they'll just drop the slimy diffusers in a bucket of bleach in the back of the truck, and that's for the next job. So, but that every site's different, every contractor is just different. But that is something that they can be cleaned out. It's best to give them some time with some bleach to clean out the plastic. Test the manual airlift switch to ensure. So if it's not blowing actively and agitating and mixing, you can check with this guy, test him, and make sure that sludge return is working properly, that it's switching back and forth, that you're getting pressure to both of those outlets, and that it's not stuck halfway between one and the other. If aerator is underperforming, it likely needs rebuilt or replaced. There is a rebuild kit for those. Like I said, that's roughly a $90-something item to get a diaphragm rebuild kit. Same rebuild kit as the high blow HP 80 and 60 is used in our dual port high blow. If the audible visual alarm sounds, this would mean like your low air alarm, which is your yellow or orange button on your panel. If that low air alarm sounds, we want to check, verify that the aerator is working, make sure it's actually functioning and blowing. Check for dislocated air lines. Something has possibly caused it to blow too freely, right? If it's the pressure's dropped, now the air alarm's going. If it's cracked on a pipe, that could cause that. Remove the small clear tubing from the air panel. So inside the panel, if your low air alarm's going off, the first things you do is come and unthread this guy and allow him to pop off. So you pull him off, then you should hear a steady, and then when you put your finger on it, it's just like so, and it should have a steady pressure, and it should be enough to feel, right? And so that would be something you'd want to check if the system's not aerating. That's one way to make sure there is pressure there. You should have a low air alarm. That's actually where the air switch is. You want to make sure there's pressure there. So if you're under alarm condition there. We want to check for water in the blower housing. So if there's water in the blower housing, that blower may have taken on that water, blown it right out, and it can blow water right down these pipes, just like it can blow air, right? But then if we got a little inside this tube of air of clear tubing, it may have blown a little column of water in there. The water doesn't pressurize like air does, so it'll create a little dam in there where it could cause. It's not getting any air switch, so that's where you go back and test the air switch, and you can see what's going on. And sometimes when you pull that off, you'll start oozing some water out of there, and that means you got water in your blower housing usually. So you go to your blower housing, you'll see that there's water in here, and if there is water in here, you want to try to get the water out of the blower housing, and then you want to force whatever water's in this line out by disconnecting back at the panel. You come and disconnect your small diameter tubing, and then you would disconnect on this guy where he is connected over to your main circuit like this. You would disconnect him, put the palm of your hand over the outlet. Now you're forcing all your air out, and it'll sputter some water until that drains freely and is blowing just air. And while I'm remembering, I didn't go through this entirely, and this is something inside the blower housing for our air drop. There will be a couple of these rubber 90s will come with each of your kits. So these rubber 90s and the adapters that come with them are meant for adapting from your blower down to those pipes that are sticking down. Usually what I recommend, there will be a pipe here and a pipe over here. Usually what I recommend is you set this guy, situate him in a place where you can line him up nice and straight, and you'll be on one of them, it'll go right over to your airdrop, right? Now maybe I'll imagine this is your 1/2 inch line. You'll run him right over to where your airdrop is, and we got these little rubber clamps, and this may line up real nicely to go and 90 down right into your airdrop for your airlift, right? So that's getting it right into there. And now you've got another one that's over here. It never does it line up to where you can line them up perfect, right? So what I recommend is he's going down. This guy here, you'll actually 90 him up. And then now you've got the opportunity to run him whichever direction you want, right? It's going to be an extra 90, but it's worth doing. What I see too often is guys will put this and they'll jam him on there, and these two guys here are stretched. You know, they're both flexing like this. You get a few wet dry cycles, some condensation, and pretty soon he's leaking, and now you got a low air alarm. It's worth that extra fitting to go up on your airdrop on one of these guys, and then you'll 90 down, you know, wherever he needs to be at.
Just
Yeah.
It's freestanding, correct?
It's just hanging. So there's a pipe here. So your pipe, it may come up, you know, something like this, and you know,
Yeah.
from your inside your blower housing. But one of these will line up real easily, no problem. But if you try to line them both up, it won't happen. Just there's usually a pick point for the rebar lid, you know, whatever. We're going through this troubleshooting. So if the audible visual alarm sounds, you want to check the water level in the tank. So if for some reason somebody pumped the tank out, and what happens usually is this thing gets pumped out. And it may happen once every 3 years, maybe once every 5 years. A big house without a trash tank ahead of it, we usually see them get pumped about once every 3 years, and it's usually just the trash chamber that needs pumped. But if you have a trash tank ahead of it, it might be much less frequent than that. It could be that ideally we'd have a system that doesn't need pumped, except for maybe over 15, 20 years you get some trash in there. But with the digester chamber being common with their trash chamber, if this system gets pumped out and they pump the whole system out, what happens is when you have a little bit of water in here come back into the tank, it doesn't take much water to create some back pressure against our diffusers here. So you're blowing air down into the diffusers in water. It's enough back pressure against our valve, our sensor on our switch, to where there's enough pressure it stays silent. We don't have alarm. But under skim mode now, if you run our airlift, our skim mode blows a little more freely. So when we're blowing against our diffusers, there's back pressure. When we're blowing to our skim mode, it's more or less blowing almost freely. So if we have this water gone, this is going to start just blowing freely. There's no resistance. So now your low air alarm might go off in the middle of the night. So if that happens, if the low air alarm goes off in the middle of the night, one thing to do is say, did your tank get pumped recently? Yeah. If it did, well, okay, just wait a day or two. That tank will fill back up, and you can ignore the nighttime alarm. It'll go off for an hour because that's how long the nighttime setting is. But that can happen. Don't expect it. The pumpers, I think, usually know to tell the people when they pump the tank, hey, by the way, your alarm may go off tonight or the next night. So make sure the tank's full of water, enough to create back pressure. If all appears normal, you may need a new air switch in the panel. That's very uncommon to need a new air switch in the panel. They're pretty reliable. So we get into water in the aerator basin. We want to, if you have water in the aerator basin, ensure that surface water is directed away from the tanks. Make sure your aerator basin, your lid is high enough to give you grade. Sometimes, I just had a site not too long ago, there was snow melt got in their blower housing, and the customer's like, he was pretty sure the contractor messed up by not putting them high enough. Well, the contractor should be talking to the landscaper and or the builder, how high do you want this? We would like our blower housing to be a little bit higher than the surrounding grade, right? We don't want it so high that they can't run their lawnmower up against it or whatever, but it should be
How high? Just curious, like 6 inches, 12 inches?
No, we're like, 2 inches or more.
Is that why sometimes they're in a doghouse over to the side, landscaping wise, people will put them off to the side? I mean, that blower you can essentially put within how far?
It should be within 50 feet of the tank.
50 feet of the tank, yeah. So I mean,
So
I've seen them where they're set off to the side. They got the green doghouse lid on them.
yeah, and that works. Have you heard of the phenomenon of ground rising?
Yeah.
If people do sidewalks, right, and then they backfill it up to an inch below, and somehow that ground starts rising. Something about soil doing that, right? Same thing goes with tank lids. You put it right flush, that ground, pretty soon your tank lid is lower than the ground around it is, whether it's organic activity, whatever. So make sure your lid, your riser lid for your vent especially, is sticking out of the ground a couple inches, just so it's just like I would say 2 or 3 inches is a good number. And that way when the grass grows, the organics start, the kind of sod layer kind of expands or whatever it does, and it's still above that surface level. We want to make sure if there's water in the basin, make sure that the electrical, all the electricals in conduit, make sure the rubber grommets are used in all riser perforations. Ensure the tank adapter is sealed around the base of it. If you need to, you can temporarily drill a 5/16 hole in the lid of the tank. 5/16 is the size that you want to use. If you use anything smaller than that, it's fairly likely to plug itself with something. 5/16 seems to be kind of a little bit bigger than a pencil. It'll keep itself. Just a hammer drill hole through there would drain that out. That's a temporary measure, though. That's not something that we'd say is just, there's some contractors say, well, I'll do that on all my systems so I never have trouble. But it is something that we would consider that a temporary measure. We don't want water leaking into our tanks generally. If you do encounter a leaking tank, a leaky blower housing where you got water coming into it, it's something that's going to happen. That phone call is going to come in February during the big snowmelt event. You don't want to be out there trying to dig up and fix the whole thing right then. What you do is a temporary fix, and then come back in May when the groundwater is gone, and then use your bentonite, whatever, fix the grommets, whatever is needed. If the aerator is loud, we can use linear compressors. Are generally made to be quiet. If the blower was right up against the side of the blower housing, that could vibrate a little bit. It is very uncommon for it to be loud.
Have you guys ever insulated them by any type?
Yeah, I have had in the Midwest, North Dakota, in different places we've had insulating on the lids, but it does still need to be vented though.
Yeah.
So, but it's almost an issue where basically just check for vibration. If these screws get taken off, like I just removed these screws on this blower lid, if this was just sitting here, there's a chance it starts vibrating a little bit.
Maybe extra noise.
Yeah, make sure the lid's screwed down.